Ethan Peck, the man who plays Spock in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, has had some very interesting things to say about his character and how he never watched TNG because it scared him. Welcome to the TAC Impulse podcast.
Our tachyon pulse has been unable to completely penetrate the anomaly.
I'm being a bit unfair doing the silly voice. It scared him. Because, if you actually listen to what he had to say, I somehow circumvented watching Star Trek as a kid. Next Generation would have been my Star Trek, but I was a little bit too young for it. I remember it giving me the heebie-jeebies because it dealt with existentialism and infinity, and those concepts, to me as a child, were really frightening. Now, let's break that down a little bit. Existentialism and infinity? And that, as a child, scared him. Okay, now, I don't understand that at all, because if as a child, if he understood that's what it was about, and that was what frightened him. Now, I think it was more likely the storylines, the monsters, things like the episode of Conspiracy frightened me. But that's interesting that is how he felt about it. And it feels to me like instead of just saying, look, Star Trek was not my jam, he's almost like trying to come up with an excuse on why. But that doesn't really matter too much, that the actor didn't like it. But the next thing I really thought was interesting, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, does it really matter if Ethan Peck was a Star Trek fan or not? Which he wasn't. The other comment he had to make was, there are so many expectations of who Spock is and who he should be, and I knew that I was entering this world of high pressure and judgment. I also felt, gosh, am I the right person for this? Because I know that this deserves someone who cares. Getting a role like this is like winning the lottery, and I'm very aware of that. Now, he did also talk about how Quinto in the J.J. Abrams movies was really able to make Spock his own, because it was a different universe. But in this, in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, he really needed to embody Leonard Nimoy's version of this character Spock. I nearly said Picard then, don't know why. Because that is the character that it would lead into. Now, I've got a pet peeve when it comes to Star Trek Strange New Worlds, in that the Spock character is, I actually think, quite different to what we then got to see in the original series. Now, there has been an argument given to me to say, look, in the pilot episode, a few years before then, the original series, that's actually stated like at least 5 years before the original series started, actually Spock does smile. And his character is a little bit different because they hadn't really quite developed what they wanted Spock to be in the pilot episode. And then running into the original series, they fine-tuned everything, and then we got the Star Trek we now know and love. So the theory is that in Strange New Worlds, Spock is still trying to connect himself with his human side. But between that and between the pilot episode and then the original series starting, he actually decides at some point to start trying to connect with his Vulcan side far more. And we see him fighting with that. I think particularly in the movies, him really fighting with his Vulcan and human side. So that is why Spock is far more serious in the original series than he is at times in Strange New Worlds. I disagree with that argument. From a production point of view, as I say, the pilot was not the character we then got to see. It was a version of Spock that was not fully developed. But it's canon. So we have to look at it, and you could argue, as I say, that maybe he was more in touch with his human side, and that actually events within Strange New Worlds, like him becoming a human, was what was actually then, like, that was why he did it, sort of thing. That's why he was trying to connect more with his human side. Also, his relationship with Nurse Chapel. So yeah, okay, I can go with that. But for me, the Spock character is different. Not because Ethan Peck isn't a fan of Star Trek, which, let's be fair, he's very clear he wasn't, at least as a child. It's because the writers don't understand what Spock is. For me, they should have really written far more a Leonard Nimoy version of Spock. A version that, yes, doesn't really totally understand the difference between his human and Vulcan side, but from his childhood through to really the movies, he was trying to fit in with the Vulcan culture. Now we see Ethan Peck's version do that, but far too often we see a version that doesn't. Now also, they did things like they never mentioned that he is related to Burnham and that he's got a sister. But I never really went with that because he also, in the movies, never mentioned he's got a half-brother. So I could always get away with that the Vulcan and Spock being quite closed in and withdrawn, particularly when it comes to his personal life, just wouldn't speak of things that he would consider to be no one else's business. But I do think Ethan Spock's version of Spock doesn't really do that. He is far more open than I think Leonard Nimoy's version of Spock ever was, even when it comes to the later movies. He doesn't really understand in Star Trek V when Kirk says about their friendship and their connection. He doesn't fully understand that, even though Spock does sacrifice himself in The Wrath of Khan to save Kirk. Spock is a character with contradictions. Let's just say that, to be fair. And that comes from his human and Vulcan side. But for me, in Strange New Worlds, those contradictions are just not very well developed. And as I say, that's not Ethan Peck's fault. It's the writers. But guys, get into the comments and tell me exactly what you think. Is Spock's character, played by Ethan Peck, who, again, is just reading lines, he's trying to do the best he can with a part, I would argue a part that maybe he doesn't fully understand, but he's following direction and following the writing. Is his version of Spock really fitting in with the Leonard Nimoy version? Are the reasons for the fact that I don't think it quite does, the reasons that I've mentioned, are they fair? Is that a reasonable argument? Get into the comments and tell me exactly what you think, because I'd love to know what you think of the character and whether it does fit in with what we really know of Spock in the bigger terms. Get into the comments and tell me exactly what you think. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell notification. It really helps us out and you'll never miss any of our new videos. Also, you become a member of the channel and get to see videos like this hours or even a day sometimes before everybody else. Go check that out. As always, please stay safe and I'll see you next time.
Our tachyon pulse has been unable to completely penetrate the anomaly.